I think we're ready to get started. It is, oh, sorry, we need 10 more seconds. We will get started in just 1 second here. I think we're trying to get the live stream on Facebook going as well, which increases the number of people who can see this. Sometimes it's a little. We are ready to go. So hello, everybody. It's Wednesday, October 7th. Thank you for joining us for a COVID briefing. It's been a few weeks since we've had one, and we have a significant update to give today. We've come through a really important month, and we've come through it in better shape than I think many of us thought was possible back at the beginning of September. We knew it was a critical transition month. We were going to attempt to open our public schools as well as our colleges for the first time since March. This is probably the most substantial, certainly the most substantial broad reopening that we have done since the end of the stay-home period. And there were a lot of risks. There was a lot of uncertainty. There was a real concern that starting these new activities would lead to a spike in infections. Numerous other communities around the country going through similar reopenings immediately had setbacks and had to pull back from the reopening, even close down colleges. And that is what we were hoping to avoid. Olivia, did you want to put up, I think we had just a screen showing how the month of September played out. This is a graphic that is always available on the city's COVID dashboard, and it is the number of new infections by day going all the way back to April. And you can see, if you look towards the right side of the graphic, you can see we entered September with right around 5 infections a day on average. That black line is sort of the running 7-day average. And over the course of September, we actually saw that very low number, below 5, go down, which was not what at a time when we were going through such opening, there was a real concern it would go in the other direction. So to actually see it go down is really a tribute to the hard work of Burlingtonians, the sacrifice and vigilance of Burlingtonians and Vermonters, and it's also a tribute to the key partners that we're going to hear from today and that are on this call, and the way in which multiple levels of protection are working with each other and so far succeeding. And I'm going to go to our partners in a moment. I will just point out, I think it's worth acknowledging, in just the last few days, since the beginning of October, actually, we have seen the numbers go up a little bit. We are back up to, we had several days in a row of 5 infections. And then we've had 1 yesterday, and I believe 2 today. So we're right now around a 7-day average of 3, still very low. We've checked in with our partners at the State Department of Health. There's no reason to believe this is some broad issue for concern, the new infections in recent days, but it is a reminder that the virus remains out there. We are not at the finish line yet by any means in this pandemic, and we're going to need to stay vigilant as we get into the colder months of the year. So I'll say more about that in a bit, but first I want to bring in some others into this conversation. I want to say thank you to the University of Vermont and Champlain College for the very substantial efforts that both of your institutions have made to keep that record going and to really take responsibility for keeping these infection levels here in Chittenden County and Burlington very low. I know it took very, very substantial investment of resources and staff commitment, and I also know that your students were a big part of this. And really, I live right next to both of your campuses, and I've been impressed throughout by the level of compliance with mask recommendations, mask rules that I have seen firsthand. And I just get the sense that the overwhelming majority of students are taking very seriously the risks involved in this pandemic. So with that, I know you're short on time, Dr. Akande. I hope I haven't drone on too long here.
No,
thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Welcome again to Burlington.
Thank you.
To you and Superintendent Flanagan, I have such sympathy that your tenures have begun in these extraordinary times, but both of you have been rising to the challenge. Welcome. Welcome any thoughts you have on the month we've just been through and the road ahead.
Thank you, Mayor Weinberger. I want to take this opportunity to express our appreciation to you and your team for the commitment and leadership in ensuring Champlain College and our neighboring higher education institutions could reopen in a safe and healthy manner during this pandemic. You know, one thing that has been very clear to me is that leading in the midst of a pandemic, when the only thing that is certain is even more uncertainty, is difficult. However, it's necessary. And you and your team have been excellent stewards to the residents of Burlington and all of us at Champlain. Our collaboration has been one of the key components in creating a safe return to campus this fall. On July 1, which was my first day at Champlain, I saw residents of Burlington walking dogs and pushing children in strollers across our campus. It became clear to me that I was not only responsible for the health, safety, and welfare of our faculty, staff, and students, but that I was also responsible and took responsibility for all those who resided around our campus and transited through it on a regular basis. And I've taken this responsibility very seriously. You know, I felt an obligation clearly to ensure that Champlain would reopen only if we could be confident that it would be accomplished safely for all the people involved. We are now steadily moving forward, as you indicated in your opening statements. We are not ready to claim success over COVID. No, we continue to see challenges on a national and state and even at the local level. But I can say, however, that Champlain thoroughly planned and prepared, made necessary investments, and leveraged the best available federal, state, and of course, Burlington city guidelines that has been resulted in some of the lowest COVID rates in the country. Champlain has taken on an all hands on deck approach to conduct and sustain surveillance testing. We've focused on dedensifying of our campus, sanitization of our campus and facilities, developing new processes to house and feed our students, diligently managing the behavior of our students through our health pledge, which is one of the critical control mechanisms that we felt would limit the exposure of the virus. And we acknowledge that the upcoming winter has variables of extended indoor confinement, as well as the usual cold and flu season on top of the pandemic. However, our plan for bringing students back for the spring semester will align with updated state and city guidelines, and we're going to take that into account, particularly as it impacts the extended community as well. I want to assure you, Mayor, that we will be in close consultation with you and your team, as always, and we will be providing complete transparency on our future reopening plans. Carrie Sleeper, our key contact and leader in our strategic move, has been on point and fully engaged with your team, Mayor. But there are some out there that would stress that reopening colleges during a pandemic could not be done safely. I want to suggest that I believe that the city of Burlington and Champlain College have demonstrated that this seemingly insurmountable obstacle can be overcome with thoughtful research, planning, execution, and collaboration. Because of this work, this semester has resulted in a remarkable life experience for our students, our faculty, and our staff, and if I may add, the president of the college. I look forward to building on this experience as we continue to work towards navigating the COVID-19 challenge that we will face moving forward. In closing, allow me to say this. This COVID pandemic has showed us what the people of this community is made of. It has showed us that this is a community that is collaborative. This is a community that is focused on what is important. And this is an affirmation of an old African adage that my dad always used to quote us every now and then. And it goes like this, that if you want to go fast, you have to go alone. But if you want to go far, we must do it together. I affirm that together, Burlington, Champlain, UVM, going together will take us far. I thank you for the opportunity to visit with you this afternoon. Thank you for having me.
Dr. Conde, thank you for those words and those sentiments. And I'm reminded, I'm really struck by many times on this briefing, we've had Dr. Leffler from University of Vermont Medical Center here, and really that consistently has been his message from the very beginning, that what it was going to take to get through this as a community is collaboration, coordination between the institutions, and really amongst us all, that none of these strategies are going to work without down to the household and individual level, people being bought into and the effort and coordinating as well. But that these institutions play a key role too. And I certainly think we saw that play out with this reopening month. It's been a pleasure working with your team as well, Dr. Conde. I think Carrie Sleeper really is a great Champlain College and Burlington success story. Someone who grew up here locally, went to Champlain College, successful career with the federal government, and then back towards the end of his career serving in this key COVID role with you. It's been a pleasure working with him. It has also been great. I know you need to run, so if you need to sign off now, thank you for joining us. If you can't stick around longer, you're welcome to, of course. I'm going to turn now to Wendy Koenig, who's been one of our key point people at the University of Vermont, which has similarly been fully committed to this community effort to try to reopen while keeping the community safe, and as in comparison to your peers and other state universities, I think it's really been an outstanding effort. And it does appear, again, no one is declaring victory here, but a month in, we're exactly where we all hoped we would be, even better maybe. Wendy, welcome. Any thoughts you have and thoughts on where we go from here?
Thank you so much for having me today. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, great. I just want to say thanks to you, Mayor Weinberger, your whole team, also to President Akande. We couldn't have done it without you. Your support as the City of Burlington and our other institutions have been so critical to our success. And I agree with President Akande that it takes a village to make these things work out. I have some data I'd like to share that I think has been critical to UVM's success in bringing students back safely and continuing on this journey moving forward. So I think we've talked about this many times before, but I'll say that we consider our testing protocol to be the bedrock for our success in a safe fall reopening. As you all know, we've done a pre-test, a day 0 test, day 7, and weekly for the remainder of the semester, and it's our intention to test weekly as we continue. At this point, we've conducted almost 65,000 tests and have a 99.5% negativity rate for COVID with UVM. So we're very proud of that fact. Our UVM testing center has been visited by other institutions, including the Vermont Department of Health. As an example, we use a supervised PCR test, and that has allowed us to be able to conduct that high level of testing on a daily basis. And I'd also like to point out that we're very grateful for our partnership with the Broad Institute that's allowed us to turn tests around in a 24-hour period. And I know Champlain has that partnership as well, and that's been instrumental in helping us prevent the spread of COVID-19 on our campus. Like Champlain, we have de-densified academic spaces. Our academic spaces have 24 to 48% capacity and follow all social distancing rules. We also have limited capacity this semester in all of our dorms, and have strict protocols for safety within those dorms, including no visitors in rooms at any time. Our dining and study spaces have also been de-densified for maximum safety. We'll continue that practice moving forward. I do want to really give a shout out to UVM students. Without student compliance, which the mayor mentioned at the beginning of his remarks, we would not have been able to do this. And we've had a few campaigns about wearing masks and social distancing and student responsibility, but they have stepped up in a way that exceeded all of our expectations, and we're so proud of their compliance and how they've made our efforts all successful. So I want to give a shout out to all of our students. Also would like to recognize our Office of Student and Community Relations and Gail Champnoy for the work that they've done about educating students within the community about what it means to be compliant with COVID regulations and also to be good neighbors. So her work has been really important in building that culture of compliance on and off campus. And our students have been excellent about educating one another and have not tolerated violations of the Green and Gold Promise. So again, we appreciate their efforts. We'd like to thank the city and the state for their partnership. We have weekly meetings with the city, the state, and the Vermont Department of Health that's just resulted in an amazing level of coordination, which has allowed us to be successful. So we couldn't have done it without all of you, and we appreciate your help and efforts. We intend to keep up this intensity. I think that's the most important thing to recognize right now, is that throughout the time back on campus, we've been successful, but if we don't remain vigilant, that will not be the case. So we'll continue these efforts. I think folks know that we will, like Champlain and other schools, be ending our semester just before Thanksgiving. Students will go home and have one more week of classes remotely, and then take their exams at home. We won't have students return until February 1st, and we have canceled spring break and will have continued testing. So we want to make sure that our efforts extend through the rest of this semester for success and into the winter months. So I appreciate having time here today, and thank you very much.
Wendy, thank you. And thank you to, of course, President Garamella for his leadership through this period. I think both President Garamella and President Conde faced difficult choices over the last 9 months in many areas, but probably those, I know those choices go kind of beyond, you know, extended areas that I probably can't even quite visualize or imagine. Some of the most visible have been the decisions about real sensitivity around not bringing students back from spring break last March. I think that was a key decision that both institutions made, and that we really may have seen a different spring and a different level of virus in the community in general, had that tough decision not been made. I know President Conde, you had to make some tough decisions about not bringing all the students back to be able to work with the facilities that within the limitations of the facilities. And then these scheduling decisions Wendy alluded to going forward, I really appreciate. I think it's very thoughtful that the very significant changes to a typical schedule, but I think they really minimize the migration to and from other areas of the country or even the world. I guess there's not a whole lot of international travel happening right now, is there? But certainly even migration to other parts of the country that have much higher levels of virus infection currently would expose Burlington in very different ways. So I think the decision to keep people here until Thanksgiving and then not coming back until February without a spring break, hopefully when you start looking that far out, there's increasingly hope that we're going to be in a different place than we are today with respect to treatments and perhaps even a vaccine. So I just want to say thank you for that thoughtful planning going forward, as well as the continued commitment to testing. I think it would be easy to get complacent at this point and maybe kind of pull back on some of these expensive investments. And I very much appreciate that that is not happening, that the that testing is continuing forward. I'm going to, if there's not anything else either you want to jump in with right away, I am going to turn to Superintendent Flanagan, who has been dealing with different issues in terms of public schools reopening, but a massive challenge as well. Major changes to the operations of each of the elementary, middle school, and unfortunately, and had to put everything in place for a high school as well for a couple of days, and then totally change gears. It's been a tough slog. And again, in your opening weeks as superintendent, we feel very fortunate to have you here for this crisis. Superintendent Flanagan, welcome.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you for having me today. I'm excited for the opportunity, and also just want to thank you personally for your partnership and your outreach to me directly. It's meant a lot, so thank you.
Absolutely.
In terms of planning, lots going on, as you mentioned. But as we've been planning and thinking about the return to school since back in, it actually started back in March, or April, but when I got here on July 1st, also really focusing on health and safety. So our priority has been to be really serious about health and safety. We know that's something that we've needed to do, and I also have 3 children in the school, and I'm in the schools, so I feel 100% committed on that effort, and so we've been leading with that responsibility. I've been leading with that responsibility, and my team has too, in all of the decisions that we're making. We've also been really relying on collaboration. We have great partnerships across the district with many different organizations that are helping us with and supporting our efforts around childcare, around additional spaces as we're looking for additional spaces with BHS, around services that are being provided, resident teachers and substitute teachers, all kinds of support across the district, including from Champlain and UVM. And also I've been impressed by, we're right by the UVM campus, and I've been impressed by the amount of, how seriously students are taking it. I see masks, everywhere, all the way up the hill, passing Champlain and all the way up into UVM, into our office. So that's been great. The last thing we've really been focusing on is communication and engagement. So making sure that we're getting regular updates out about what's happening. This has been a changing landscape as we're keeping track of the sickness, of the pandemic, of the way that the numbers are happening across the city and the state, but also the changing guidance that's coming out of the state. So we're relying heavily on our guidance that's coming out from the Vermont Agency of Education, and they're collaborating with the Vermont Department of Health on that guidance. And so that's led us though to a really strong start. So our pre-K 8 start was excellent. We had 90% of our students who about 90% are back and have been back in the hybrid model. So they're going to school 2 days a week in person, and then 3 days in a remote setting. It's not ideal, not the way that learning should happen, I don't believe, but it was a really good way for us to get back into school and start to get that in-person instruction and learning and social emotional learning that we know our students need, our staff needs, those connections as well. Really focused on daily health screenings and making sure that students and families are checking in each day to make sure that they're healthy coming to school. And those things have paid off. So we've had no cases of COVID in our schools. And we are settling in to school, to more normalcy in our school, which I think is really important for the health of our community. And we'll keep doing that. Obviously, I'm looking at the numbers every day, making sure we're keeping on top of where things are and making decisions as it relates to the health and safety of our students. The numbers are in our schools, in the city, in the state, are suggesting it's time to move back to more in-person instruction. The state just moved from step 2 to step 3 in their guidance, which allows us some additional flexibilities. They are coming out with guidance that is giving, or additional guidance to the guidance that's giving us additional information that we'll be using. But I send a message out to the community that K-5 is going to be coming back 4 days a week, Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, Friday. On October 19th, we'll start with K2, and then October 26th, we are planning for 3-5 to come back. Districts across the region and across the state are doing this. So pretty much the entire Champlain Valley is coming back more in person. Most are 4 days, some are 5, but most are 4, and most are in this K5 range to start. And the idea is to just, start slowly, make sure we're doing it well, make sure it's safe, and then we can continue to increase, I believe. We'll keep those staffing protocol, those safety protocols in place. Our staff have been amazing. So we've got just a wonderful group of teachers and school leaders and administrators and paraeducators and multilingual liaisons, and all of our entire staff has really stepped up to make sure that this is happening and that we're ready to move to the next level. We have had a major challenge. So students actually never got back into the building because we were doing 2 days of freshman of 9th grade orientation. And that was mostly happening outside. When we learned that the air quality, there were high PCB number rates in the air in one of the buildings. And so we had to close the building as a whole. We got the other numbers back, and we ended up having to stay closed based on a decision that we made, but that I had to make, but it was in consultation with the Vermont Department of Health and the EPA. We're really working urgently to find new space or to get back into the old space. We have a big decision to make about that. And our goal is to get back in person by January 4th for second semester. So hopefully we can do that. And we're working extremely hard with the school board and our city partners and state partners to make sure that can happen. And then we're also focusing in on remote learning to make sure remote learning is all that it can be in high school. And the last thing is that the technical center, so we have been able to find some in-person spaces for our Burlington Technical Center. So that's a smaller group of students that can be in more non-traditional spaces in different parts of the city. And so programs, we're starting to move programs in person in the technical center, which is good and shows kind of a light at the end of the tunnel, I believe. And then in conclusion, kind of moving forward, continuing to take health and safety seriously, continuing to collaborate and communicate and engage as we're moving forward.
Excellent. Thank you for that report. I got to say, I've had some firsthand experience with the daily health screenings whenever I've dropped Ada off at IEA, and it's been really impressive just to see that clearly there's the whole system has, at least that school, I haven't been to all of them during this period, but the culture of mask wearing is very clear. The commitment to the daily health screenings is clear. It's all worked in a really orderly way. These are roles you've had to staff. No one's ever been in them before doing this kind of check-in. It's been really impressive to see. It is very exciting to hear that we're potentially less than 2 weeks out from a significant expansion of the first K2 and then full K5 systems. I fully support that move in that direction. I think there's really a lot of data to go out there suggesting that if you have the right protocols in place and if you do have low levels of community virus transmission, it is something that can be done safely. I know a big decision, but I applaud you and really, as a parent and as the mayor, appreciative that you guys are headed in this direction right now. And I do want to just, again, return to the idea, though, that this is only possible. You can only have schools operating with this level of safety. You can only have the colleges have this kind of success if the general level of virus transmission is at the very low level and under control, the way it has been here in Chittenden County and Burlington. And that no amount of preparations or precautions is going to be enough if we lose that kind of broader community vigilance. So this is yet another call of celebrating some good news in the spirit of acknowledging we've made some progress, and not as a declaration of success, but as a I hope we take, anyone who has seen this program, sees what's going on here, take some optimism and confidence that if we keep up what we're doing, we're going to be able to continue to make it through this very challenging period for the community. I think that is, Superintendent, unless there's anything else you want to add, I'm going to shift a little bit. And if you're able to stick around, there could be some questions at the end. We do have a number of members of the media here. I'm going to try to get to them in a moment. If you have to leave us, understood. I do just want to speak a little bit about what the city is going to do going forward to try to continue this record of a very low virus transmission. We are keeping in place the additional limits on indoor and outdoor residential gatherings. 10 people indoors, 25 outdoors is the maximum. That is going to stay in place for at least into November and possibly longer. I think the clarity of those regulations and what they mean have been helpful. We have loosened as of Monday. We have reverted. We've gotten rid of this extra regulation on bar operations, the limitation of bar hours. We are now back to the same restrictions that the rest of the state is under. I do think it's worth repeating that bars and restaurants and all businesses are operating under extraordinary additional health regulations right now as a result of COVID, and those additional precautions, of course, remain in place as these extended hours are restored. We are within several days here. We're happy to see an initiative starting at the airport that will involve a variety of services being offered to travelers through the airport that allow additional both antigen rapid testing as well as access to additional PCR tests, these tests that we've come to think of as the standard during COVID. This is not a municipal operation. It's something that the city is leasing space to a private company for them to be able to do this. But knowing that the airport is one of the potential vectors for the virus into this area, I think having these additional services in place is something I see as a positive, and that will we hope be just an added layer of strategy and effort in terms of virus suppression. And then the final thing we want to speak to today, and I've got Brian Lowe, our Chief Innovation Officer, has zoomed in to be part of this discussion. We want to announce that we are coming out of the pilot period for our wastewater surveillance efforts. That's something that we began at the beginning of the month. And we are committing to at least 3 months and likely longer of wastewater testing in partnership with the Dartmouth Hitchcock Medical Center. This effort really builds on the field of wastewater epidemiology that has been studied by a number of journals in recent months and has been found to be potentially effective. The Dartmouth-Hitchcock Medical Center has agreed, as I understand it, and Brian and Carolyn, Felix, who's joined us, can speak in more detail to this. My understanding is Dartmouth-Hitchcock is excited to partner with the city on this and help expand this effort. They are going to be testing twice a week, and I'm happy to say they are going to do this additional testing at no cost to Burlington taxpayers. There will be philanthropic contributions that are going to help Dartmouth-Hitchcock do this service. And the thinking behind this effort is that this testing in these three different wastewater plants, we can really get a real-time, early indicator of levels of virus transmission in these different catchment areas within the city. Given that what we know about the virus, given that we know, we can all look at what's happened in the White House right now. By the time there was a positive test under the kind of traditional, the PCR testing is something of a lagging indicator. By the time you have a positive test, you can already have an outbreak that is pretty advanced. What wastewater testing offers the promise of is getting an early sense of when the virus seems to be surging or spiking in the community, and giving us the potential then to take a number of different interventions that can help contain the further spread. With that, I'd like to turn it over to Brian and Carolyn to share a little bit more, share some of the data that we've generated so far, and maybe you can add some texture to what this capacity does.
Hey, thank you, Mayor. Very happy to be here. And we're also grateful. I know Megan Moyer from the Water Department couldn't join today, but both she and Matt Dow have been just outstanding colleagues in helping implement this with Carolyn and I over the last couple months now. So you mentioned the potential early warning value here, and I think I'd love to speak a little bit more to that. I think it's important to give just a quick sentence of background on kind of wastewater-based epidemiology, in that it is something that's been around for decades. It's been used to detect polio, and it's been used more recently to monitor opioid use levels in communities. So in some ways, it's an old technology. In other ways, this is a very new application for it, and it's really an emerging technology. And when Carolyn and I speak to some of the data we've collected, we'll make sure to caveat what that means for us and the kind of implications of that. As you note, Mayor, it does give us it gives us a new tool to help increase the likelihood that we identify an outbreak in the community sooner. And what I mean by that is that people tend to shed RNA through their stool about 7 days before it would be picked up by kind of traditional clinical testing, prior to being symptomatic. And that gives us a great moment in time to kind of see and begin to anticipate a problem, so we can deploy different kind of interventions to address that problem. The challenge that we have with a tool like this is that not everybody sheds RNA through their stool. And that means that there's a probability issue, and we also have to catch it in the sampling window. So it's not an imperfect tool, but it is another layer, even imperfect, that gives us kind of important value and helps us identify trends and where those trends are occurring in the city. So I think the last word of kind of context, and then I might turn it over to Carolyn to speak to some of the specific data that you referenced, Mayor, is there are 3 wastewater treatment facilities in Burlington, a north, east, and main plant. And so it automatically breaks the city down into 3 catchment areas that we can monitor and see what those trends are in those different areas. The pilot that the mayor referred to was something that was in place the week of August 7th and ran 8 weeks until October 5th, where we had 1 sample a week taken at each of these different wastewater treatment plants. We wanted to make sure that we could see it, that we could actually do it, and that the data was useful that we were acquiring. And we're also lucky in that we put this in place during a period of relatively low prevalence. People, once they have the coronavirus, once they've contracted it, they will shed through their stool for a period of time after they're infectious. And so if you implement this at a period of high infection, its ability to act as a screening tool is compromised. And so the fact that we're able to do it at a period of very low prevalence is important and should allow us to see an upswing if something like that happens in Burlington. Carolyn, let me turn it over to you to speak a little bit about some of the sampling and data that we've collected so far, and then we can kind of turn back to some of the mayor's other points.
Sure. Thank you. And I think that kind of just to start, we'll say that the data that we were collecting was done through split sampling. So we were sending samples to BioBot, a private lab based in Cambridge, Massachusetts, as well as our research partners at Dartmouth-Hitchcock Medical Center and UVM. And so the data that we're going to look at today from the pilot project is over that 8-week period. And this is the data that we received back from our partner BioBot. One thing that's really important to note here is that when interpreting viral data in wastewater, it's really best to use the data to monitor and observe the trends over time, not necessarily individual readings themselves. So to date, we have not seen a trend in the wastewater here in Burlington. What we are looking at here is kind of the level of non-infectious RNA. That's on the y-axis. And the x-axis is the date the sample was taken from the wastewater treatment facility. And so what can we interpret here from this limited data set that we have so far? The wastewater signals detected thus far really have some variability, but overall seem to be indicative of a relatively low presence, viral presence in the community, which is consistent with newly reported clinical cases that are reported by VDH that we've seen over the same time period. And so what you can see here is if you look down to the sample taken on September 10th, that's really where we did see some detection of viral RNA in the wastewater. And so based on what we know so far in conversations with BioBot about their levels of detection, our theory is that the low levels of detection that we saw this week at the East and Main plant were most likely due to the significant change in our population. So we saw a huge population change early August when 10,000 plus students arrived in Burlington. And so that's likely what we were seeing here in the wastewater. As Brian mentioned, though, it's really important to note that the technology here is picking up primarily new cases, but can also pick up people who have been shedding the virus even though they're no longer infectious. And so that's essentially what we believe we saw the week of September 10th. It's also really important here to emphasize that a zero reading or a non-detect doesn't necessarily mean that there's no virus present in the community. It just means that the viral levels are lower than we can detect with the technology.
Yeah. And maybe one last comment I would make there. I mean, I think Carolyn's point about when more than 10,000 individuals return to Burlington, when more than 10,000 people come back to Burlington and are generally grouped into one treatment plant, the East plant, and are coming from all different parts across the country. Some of those individuals may have contracted COVID at some point asymptomatically and not realized it. Some of them may be recovering. And so this very low set of readings that you see really between the 27th and the 10th is consistent with what we would actually expect if you have a increase in our local population and doesn't necessarily indicate higher infection. And again, coming after the 10th, you really continue to see, even at the 10th, you're seeing very low prevalence levels. But after that, you're seeing even lower levels, which is a very good sign.
Yeah, thanks, Brian. It's also important to emphasize that this is, as you mentioned, an imperfect data set. So we shouldn't be looking at this data and information in isolation. And there are a lot of limitations to the data. So these are, again, they're point in time samples. They're composite grab samples that we're looking at once a week. Therefore, not all people may have contributed to the sample on that day. And we could also be picking up RNA from commuters, people who are coming into Burlington for the day and making a deposit, but who may not necessarily live here in Burlington. So it's important to keep all these things in mind as well. And as Brian mentioned, it's unknown the rate of folks that actually shed the virus. Best estimates now are a range between 30 and 60%. And it's also unclear, even though we're picking up asymptomatic and symptomatic cases, it's still really kind of unclear how the levels of viral shedding change over the course of an infection. So these are all things to consider, as well as just the sampling variations. We're going to have variations in flow and weather events and dilution, and these are all things that need to be accounted for when looking at this data.
But I do think it's exciting to see this new system in place and going to twice a week testing, which would help us identify trends much more quickly. And that we know that if we are going to see some kind of change in caseload or surge in cases, that we'd have a little bit of a window of time in which we could begin to react to that, not have to wait for it to show up in the form of symptomatic patients getting clinical tests later in time.
Great, thank you for that discussion. I think the discussion of the kind of gaps in this technology, to me, remind. I think it's important that we acknowledge them, and at the same time, this does strike me as an important additional tool. This whole, if you kind of look at the arc of where we are now versus where we were back in March, when we had just very little information, very little understanding of the virus. What we've been doing since then internationally is building knowledge, building strategies, and they are all in a sense harm reduction strategies, since we don't have a cure, we don't have a total solution, but by layering good hygiene on top of mask wearing, on top of these daily screening checks, on top of testing, each one of those layers is an additional layer of protection. This wastewater testing strikes me as a significant, imperfect, but a significant additional layer of protection that if and when we do see a surge on that chart that we had up a moment ago, can you speak a little bit to more how we will use this if we do see a substantial spike, and what kind of actions you anticipate us and the Department of Health and other partners taking if we do see a substantial increase?
Yes, I'm happy to do that. And I really just want to echo the point about kind of layered interventions. There's no perfect solution to the coronavirus. And I think that this, in concert with the things you just laid out about hygiene, mask wearing, and also the new antigen testing available at the airport alongside PCR testing, along with the group size restrictions that you put in place. I mean, it's part of a system of interventions designed to reduce the likelihood of transmission without damaging the economy over much. So I think I totally agree with that point. In terms of interventions that wastewater treatment could lead to, I think, particularly with the twice a week testing, we would be able to see and pick up a potential surge early, likely, right? I mean, there's some uncertainty in terms of, just to say, who is pooping when and whether or not they're shedding through their stool. So we should be able to see over time a trend or an increase, and we should be able to see it early with the twice a week testing. If we see a sudden significant surge, we could test again earlier, not wait for that kind of second of the week test. We could test immediately. And what that does in concert with VDH, who's been a great partner here, and I'm remiss in not thanking them already, that can lead to a number of different types of interventions. Some of those interventions could be around communications the city makes, alerting residents to an increased elevated risk in a particular part of the city. It could take the form of anything from communications from the mayor's office to the deployment of things like, if we really need to get the word out, having the construction signs, I'm blanking on the name of what they are, but kind of the signs that we use in construction sites to make sure individuals know how to travel across like different lanes. It could be flashing information, which we do when we have important votes or surveys out, and we want people to know to change their behavior. It could also lead to things like pop-up testing in that, if there is an elevated amount of RNA and it looks like it's a trend, we have evidence that we can then take to VDH and talk with them about what are other assets we can deploy to help keep people safe and help kind of truncate any rise in caseload in Burlington.
Excellent. All right. Well, with that, I think, just checking my notes, I think we pretty much covered that. And oh, actually, sorry, there was one more point I think we did just want to make about we've had some prior discussion about even more granular wastewater testing facility-specific testing. And we are going to keep the door open to some of that on an ongoing pilot basis. Brian or Carolyn, do you want to speak a little bit more to kind of what we focused in on with respect to individual facility testing?
I'm happy to. Carolyn, do you want to speak to it as well, or?
Well, yeah, I'm happy to kind of explain where we are in our thinking right now. And Brian, please do jump in. So we're really looking at this kind of as like a phase 2 to the pilot to really think about how we can use more granular testing or surveillance here in Burlington. So we're working really closely with VDH to think through what our selection criteria might be to determine the highest value facilities or sites that we would want to monitor. So in addition to trying to identify these locations from a research perspective to demonstrate the potential value for more granular monitoring, we want to make sure that we're zooming in to areas where there's locations where residents have known vulnerabilities or we have higher population densities. And I think that's where we're going to have the highest return on this kind of investment for monitoring, and also a way to kind of have the most actionable data available if we do see a spike or a signal when it's kind of at a more granular facility or location.
And I think just to add on to what Carolyn is saying there, I think one of the things that's exciting here is that it is a relatively new technology. There are some other communities that are deploying this. I think Northeast Ohio and New Haven in Connecticut are kind of leaders in that, as the mayor mentioned earlier in the briefing. But one of the potential values of wastewater surveillance testing is that it could help supplement, or even in some potential scenarios, replace the need for kind of clinical testing regularly at different kinds of facilities. And so we at Burlington have an opportunity, given the kind of high volume of testing that's being done across the city on a regular basis, to potentially look at how wastewater does relative to some of the clinical testing and see if we can't contribute to that discussion, which is important. If there are ways that we can conserve some of that clinical testing capacity and keep people safe without it having to be deployed constantly, it could be repurposed for other needs or conserved for other needs in the future.
All right, great. If people want to get deeper into that kind of ongoing pilot, we can do that, but why don't we pause there and Olivia, open up the floor for questions from the media if there are any.
Great. So a reminder for members of the media who are tuning in, you can let me know you have a question by sending me an email, and then I can enable your microphone here on Zoom. So the first question is from Ross from NBC5. Ross, go ahead.
Hi there. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can, Ross. Go ahead.
We're expecting a decision at some point today from Governor Phil Scott on S54, the bill that would establish a tax and regulated cannabis market here in Vermont. Curious to get your thoughts on how tax and regulated cannabis may impact Burlington, if it's something that you think would be beneficial to the city, and maybe what you hope to see out of the decision from the governor.
Thanks, Ross. So, you know, my position on this is what it's been for years, which is that I am, you know, all things considered, supportive of a regulated, taxed cannabis system, especially if significant percentages of the revenues being generated are being rolled back into educational efforts that are aimed at perhaps even bringing down from current levels the level of usage by teens when we know there are much greater health risks than for adults later on. I must say that the current bill sitting on the governor's desk, I think many municipal leaders across the state have substantial disappointment in that the revenue flowing from this new taxation is very limited in terms of what that revenue is that is going to flow to municipalities. And I think that's a big problem. The municipalities are going to be on the front lines of implementing implementing these regulations, implementing permitting around new types of businesses. There will be public health and public safety impacts as a result of this new system, and yet what won out in the legislature was not a Senate proposal, which would have taxed, as I understand it, cannabis comparably to alcohol, and allowed very significant revenues to flow to municipalities, but a version from the House side that by more than 50% reduces the revenues that would be flowing to municipalities. So regardless of whether the governor signs this now or whether it gets sent back to the legislature, this is something that I and other municipalities are going to be focused on. This will need to change going forward. It really, we were quite disappointed with, especially given the high level of taxation that is being put on the industry, how little of it was flowing to municipalities at a time when I think we all know municipalities have been hit extraordinarily hard by the pandemic and have an extraordinary need for revenue right now. Many of us, like Burlington, are seeing revenues down. In the double digits, and it's likely to stay reduced for years. I think it would really be quite wrong if the system doesn't ultimately allow significant revenues to flow to municipalities.
And is that a problem you think might be best addressed by scrapping and starting over in January? Or would you think personally that it might be best to at least get something moving and then over the course of establishing the marketplace, once it is approved, maybe go in and make that change?
You know, Ross, this is a complicated bill. There's a lot of different factors that go into it. Where I'm sitting, I can really just speak best to the municipal impacts. And like I say, we have real concerns. I think it could be addressed in either way. That's what I think it will need to be. I think, the governor has a lot of broader set of considerations he has to weigh right now. And I don't think, especially, given the focus that I've had in recent months, I don't feel well positioned to give him to weigh in on everything before him in that decision.
Well, thank you very much.
Thank you, Russ.
Okay, our next question is from Grace from VT Digger. Grace, go ahead.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, Grace, I can. Go ahead.
You may have said this and I may have missed it, so I apologize if that's the case. How much is the COVID-19 wastewater treatment testing costing the city so far?
So I'll let Brian come on in a moment and speak to what it's cost us so far. Going forward, we're excited to say the twice a week testing is entirely being covered by the Dartmouth Hitchcock Medical Center. There is no ongoing cost to that regular twice a week monitoring, as I understand it, going forward. We have incurred some minor costs that we are expecting emergency reimbursement for up until now. Brian, do you want to speak to where we're at in terms of the costs to date?
Happy to, Mayor. The initial pilot, Grace, ran about 8 weeks. It cost the city about $25,000. There's a little bit of variability there, and the last week I need to calculate, but it's about $1,000 per sample for those weeks. The ongoing, as the mayor said, Dartmouth Hitchcock is going to come in and do twice a week sampling, so doubling the sampling volume, but that will be at no additional cost to taxpayers. And as the mayor said, we believe this is also likely reimbursable expenses. If the city decides to do additional wastewater testing, that could be an additional future cost, and that would also likely be reimbursable.
Great, thank you. And I was curious if Wendy Koenig or Dr. Akande are still on the line. Are they available?
They both had to jump off, Grace. Sorry about that.
That's okay. I can follow up with their communications people, but I did want to ask you, Mr. Mayor, about whether or not leadership from UVM or Champlain College have expressed that they'll need municipal funding support or state funding support to continue the trajectory of testing that they're doing so far. I know that some of the state grants that they've received have gone to their testing, but I was curious if you've heard from them about whether or not more money is going to be needed to continue this for the spring semester.
Grace, I have not gotten any indication from the colleges to date that they are looking for assistance to continue the testing. To the contrary, my understanding, and Brian, correct me if you understand it differently, but both both Champlain and UVM are committed. I think we heard this reasserted today to continue the testing through the students going home in November at the levels that they have been doing up until now. I think there's a big question about what I have not heard them make commitments for the spring yet, and I'm comfortable with that, given that I think we may be looking at a pretty different landscape by the spring. And so I certainly, if we're still where we are now, the virus remains the threat it is now, we don't have a vaccine in place. We're certainly going to be looking for there to be a testing strategy in place. I think it's too soon to tell what is going to be in place, what we're going to be looking at in February. So we'll certainly be actively engaged with them as that gets closer. Brian, do you want to add anything to that?
No, I don't have anything further from our discussions.
Gotcha. Thank you.
All right, and that is all the questions we have for today.
All right, great. Thank you everyone for tuning in. It's been good to be back with you. We are thinking we will likely have another briefing again next Wednesday, but Olivia will be in touch with details on that. Thank you everyone. We'll talk to you again soon.